Well, good morning and welcome to Our Stories. Our guest today is not a guest, but guests in that Richard and Ruth Sublett are here as a couple. And we've been talking over the last couple of weeks about their experience of adopting two children from Russia. Why don't we start first with you guys sharing what led to your decision to think about starting another family and doing so through adoption?
Well, we'd been married for a couple years, and we had talked about having a family several times, but we were past the age of babies and diapers and that type of thing, so we had had some thoughts about adoption.
And I think because we were comfortable in our life, that we were kind of searching for something more to give meaning to our life. We were too old for babies, but too young just to grow old. Our children were grown, I should have said, and out of the home by then. Yeah. And then we just became more aware of the kids in orphanages that didn't have food, medical care, and we felt like that was something we could provide, that we could be matched up with that.
So you didn't look into domestic adoption then?
No, not really, because we'd heard too many horror stories of people that had adopted kids from the United States, and then 3 years later a great uncle comes along and wants the kids back, and the adoption is over.
Yeah.
And maybe the need too, in the United States we had foster care. They didn't have that in Russia at that time. And right. Just knowing that they were really starving, kids living on the streets, and just seemed like there was a great need there.
Yeah. All right, so you decided to look into international, and did you begin in Russia with where you were looking, or are there other places first, or how did that happen?
Well, we knew there was a lot of research. Even though there wasn't Facebook back then, this is 24 years ago, yeah. There was a lot of resources online, and we had communication with a lot of other people who had adopted from Russia. And so there were different photo listings. There was a site called Precious in His Sight, and you could just see photo listings of kids from all different countries that were adopting internationally. And so that's where we first started looking, and then we looked at what agency had those children, and then we started researching those agencies, and several times we came across several kids that we were interested in, but something would happen this way or that, and finally we found Katya and Frank, and then everything went really quickly after that.
Right. You both had children from previous marriages. How did they feel about your embarking on a new family?
I think they were just kind of, indifferent might not be a good word, but I don't think they really cared one way or the other.
Kind of like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Nobody objected anyway.
Yeah, okay. So when you first began to submit the paperwork, what were your expectations in the very beginning about how long you assumed that the process would take?
Well, based on the people that we had talked to and over the internet and stuff, we seemed like the average time was about 2 years from start to finish. And so we didn't expect things to happen as quickly as they did for us. Yeah. I mean, we were 5 months from start till we had the kids home. So
yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
I think there was some divine intervention.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I wondered about was, you read all your information, and I certainly couldn't keep straight all of the steps of that you had to go through, and all the different kinds of paperwork and so forth. But I had to wonder, how many times along there did you think, oh man, I don't think this is ever really gonna work, I would have thought it would have been, the tedium of those kinds of things would have been difficult to.
Yeah, it seemed like there for a while, it seemed like every time we completed some paperwork, then we found out there had to be more. Like, we had to end up being fingerprinted twice, 2 different locations. Once here at Richland, and then we had to drive to Macomb once to get fingerprinted.
In that whole process, what was the biggest obstacle, do you think?
The INS, the Immigration and Naturalization Service of our government. They were super, super slow. I mean, things that you would think would take a few days would take 5 or 6 weeks.
Yeah, I think our agency called them a couple of times to try to push it along.
As you were headed to Russia, were you, did you feel like this was really gonna happen? Or was there any concern, like, we've given them all this money and maybe this is a big scam? Or
Actually, we were still carrying most of the money, a lot of the money with us in cash, but I think our greatest worry was probably just, what are we, is this really okay for us to do? Are we too old? Will the kids come home? Will they be okay coming home with us? It's a huge, they went from being in this isolated little town in Russia and just getting on an airplane. There were just so many things we worried about that part. I don't think we ever worried about that it was a scam or anything.
Well, too, the thing that, one of the things that really struck me was that, you were having to put your trust in people that you didn't know, that you hadn't met, who were going to be there, supposedly, when you got there. I mean, that's a lot to extend your trust to other people in that kind of situation, where it's not like now where you could even, like do a face-to-face phone call or something like that and have some sense of who they might be,
They kept pretty close tabs on us. I mean, helpful-wise, once we got there.
Well, we did get, we looked, there was plenty of people that had used these same agencies, so we had contact with other people who had successfully completed an adoption, so.
Well, that would certainly give you some reassurance.
Yeah.
So tell us what it was like when you got there and finally see, your kids to come.
Yeah, because we've been looking at this little photo listing. I had it taped up by my desk for, the whole time period, and we watched their video over and over again. So we kind of felt like they were our kids already, even though we hadn't met them. So when we walk in the room and there's these 2 little bodies sitting on a couch, and Katya had this huge bow on her head, and we were nervous about it, but right away everything just seemed to be very at ease. They immediately called us Mama and Papa, and were asking, of course it was all in Russian, but we had an interpreter there that, they were wanting to know when we were going to America, and I think they would have left right then.
So what was the orphanage like?
It was not a nice, new, neat place on the outside. It looked pretty run down. I mean, not falling down, but just maybe in disrepair. There's a lot of rusty playground equipment in the courtyard there. But it was totally different once you walked in the door. I mean, there was nice murals painted on the walls in bright, cheery colors, and like Walt Disney characters and that type of thing. And on one wall there was lockers for, each kid had a locker. There was different designs painted on every door, and it was nice.
What they didn't have, I think, was food. From what we hear, the only time they served meat was for when people like us, parents, came to get kids. We got a little chicken leg, but I think food was a real problem there. They didn't have their own clothes. We had to take everything, underwear, socks,
Wow.
the whole bit. They had to take off the clothes they were wearing, the orphanage clothes, and leave them, and then, and then of course all the clothes we brought were too big because they were so much smaller than from the malnutrition. They all seemed small.
Frank was 6 years old, but he still wore size 3 clothes, so.
Yeah. You talked about how it appeared on the outside, and reading your notes, it seemed like you passed a lot of buildings that were pretty much
in the town of Noashaktanks. Yes.
pretty run down.
Yeah, there's a lot of the streets there in town were still dirt, so.
Just a lot of poverty.
About the time we got there, it was just after, was it Yeltsin? Yeah, I think Yeltsin was the head guy then. He had shut down all the coal mines. So there was a lot of people that were out of work in that area, so.
Well, you talked about things that the kids hadn't been exposed to, and that, it was that must have been a pretty big surprise to see them encounter stuff that we kind of consider so commonplace that they were really unaware of.
The first time we went someplace, when we left the orphanage, we all got in cars, and we're pretty sure that was the first time they had ever been in a car.
Wow.
They were just kind of, inquisitive, uneasy. I don't know, all the.
I remember Katya was always telling the driver, to roll out a window, roll up, they were, every little thing like that was.
Turn up the radio, turn down the radio. And a few days later, whenever we were in Moscow, we went to the park one day, and there was a vendor there selling popcorn. So that would be a good snack for them, They had never had popcorn. They really didn't know what to do with it. You eat it. So.
And balloons.
Yeah.
They were thrilled with balloons.
What do you think were looking back on it, the biggest challenges that you faced with the kids once you had them home here in Decatur?
Number one had to be the language, because we only spoke about 2 words of Russian, and they didn't speak any English, so that was the big thing.
Were there any particular agencies that were, I don't know, in terms of Decatur and international adoption, where, what you can rely on? So.
There were really no organizations in Decatur.
We had to do our home study through the Baptist Children's Home. I mean, that's just who we were using out of Mount Vernon.
Right.
And so they did follow up with us. They had to do, in Illinois, you have to be a foster parent first. So you're a foster parent, and so they're doing the home studies until a certain, I think we did 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, and 3 year. And so they would follow up with us, but we really credit the school, John Seal's teachers, the first teachers they had, Mrs. Jacobs, who did the ESL, and Mrs. Allen and Mrs. Pepper. They were really instrumental in helping the kids get adjusted and helping us know, what to do. And, they had, I would say, Dr. Jerger. We had a lot. Katya her teeth were a mess, and he was really patient and really, worked with it to get her teeth, dental work done. So people like that, the doctors and nurses that helped out.
They both had giardia
Oh, yeah.
whenever they came, and they had to get a blood test like every 30 days. And little Frank would go to the hospital to get the blood test, and he'd roll up his sleeve and throw it out there like, here I am.
Yeah, little skinny guy.
Yeah.
And they also had, because it had TB, we never really knew whether it's because they were vaccinated against TB or if they were exposed to it, but they both had positive TB tests. So they had to take the INS or INH, I think was the, like a preventative to
Yeah,
prevent
right,
tuberculosis. So they did that for 6 months or so.
Yeah.
There was a woman up in Michigan who had adopted a daughter maybe a year before we adopted Katya and Frank. And she met with us before we went. She had pictures from when she had gone to adopt her daughter that included Frank in those pictures. And then she got together other parents, other families that had all adopted from this orphanage in Novoshakhtinsk. And every year we would have a get-together, a weekend in Chicago.
Mm.
So that was really good for the kids to actually see other kids. And
Right.
some kids weren't there at the same time, but there was
Yeah.
several there that, when our kids were there was at least 3 other kids that they knew.
One of the things that, when we first started, I think, was one Sunday we came to church and Reverend Dr. Oldenburg was preaching a sermon, and it was about taking care of the children. And
Of the world.
whenever we went out, of course, he was out there in the front and shaking hands with everybody, and whenever we went by, he says, the only thing he said was, do you have children? And on the way home, Ruth and I were kind of looking at each other, and we were thinking, do you think he was talking to us? It was kind of...
Yeah, kind of got the ball rolling.
Right.
Well, this is unrelated to that, but just a little memory I had of when we went to get them, because I guess they had nothing. I mean, they came back with, I think Frank had a handful of little orange soldiers or something that were his toys, but they kept everything. Like, we had these backpacks that had a plastic, you could see through like a little plastic pocket on it, and we would see every milk carton, straws, everything. They kept it, and then they made stuff out of it.
Mm.
They were always very ingenious. What is that word for creative and stuff? They
Yeah.
just would. One time we were shopping for bread, and the bread is just sitting on the shelves in the store, not in wrappers or anything. And we're kind of thinking, oh, what are we going to do with this bread, to keep it clean? And he whips out this plastic bag out of his pocket that he had saved from something else.
Oh, man. Oh. Well, I thank you both for sharing. It's really quite an event that you went through, and it took a lot of work, a lot of courage, a lot of faith on your part to pursue that. And where are they now?
They're here in Decatur.
You know what I think?
Mhm. They both are. Yeah. Katya's a mom. She has a 3-year-old.
Has her own house, bought her own house, bought her own car.
Yeah.
She works at, I forget the lawyer's name, anyway, downtown there where the newspaper used to be. She
Mm.
works for some lawyers there.
Yeah.
Frank works at Caterpillar through a temp agency. He lives a couple streets over from us. He has an apartment.
Well, thanks again. It was really
You're
great
welcome.
to have you share. I appreciate your time.
Yes,
with
we
us.
like talking about it.
Thank you.